The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Fort Worth, Texas, like a crack of lightning, and Florence Harper didn't even flinch. While other women shrieked or ducked for cover, she simply looked up from her basket of freshly picked wildflowers and frowned at the disruption. It was 1876, and in this corner of the West, violence was as common as the tumbleweeds that rolled down Main Street. But Florence had never been able to harden her heart to it the way everyone seemed to expect. For heaven's sake, Florence, get down. Martha Wilkins, the seamstress, hissed from where she crouched behind a water trough. You want to catch a stray bullet with that dreamy head of yours, Florence sighed and reluctantly crouched, though she knew the shooting had come from the saloon 3 buildings down and posed no immediate danger. It's just those cowboys showing off again, she said softly. No one's really aiming to hurt anyone. Martha rolled her eyes. Your softness is going to get you killed in this town. This ain't Boston, dear. Florence had heard similar comments since arriving in Fort Worth 6 months ago after her father's passing. At 22, she had no choice but to leave Massachusetts and come west to live with her only remaining relative, her Aunt Gertrude, who ran the town's small boarding house. Unlike most frontier women who had adopted a necessary hardness to survive, Florence remained stubbornly gentle, refusing to carry a pistol, refusing to speak harshly, and worst of all, refusing to ignore suffering of any kind. As the commotion died down, Florence rose and brushed the dust from her simple blue dress. I should get these flowers back to Aunt Gertrude before they wilt completely in this heat. Martha stood and shook her head. Flowers, in Fort Worth, like putting lace on a bull. She sighed with genuine concern. One of these days, Florence, you'll realize this land doesn't reward the gentle, it chews them up and spits them out. Florence offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd heard it all before. 6 months of being told her kindness was a weakness, her compassion a liability, her gentleness a fatal flaw in a place where survival often meant hardening one's heart. She continued down the wooden sidewalk, her basket of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush creating a splash of color against the dusty monotone of the town. As she passed the doctor's office, she noticed a crowd gathering outside. Curiosity pulled her toward the commotion, where she found the town physician, Dr. Mills, tending to a man sprawled on the boardwalk. Stand back, give him air, Dr. Mills ordered, his weathered hands pressed against a growing crimson stain on the man's shirt. Florence edged closer. Can I help, doctor? Dr. Mills barely glanced up. Unless you've suddenly developed a stomach for blood, Miss Harper, I suggest you keep walking. But Florence didn't move. The injured man's face was taut with pain, his breathing labored. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him, set down her basket, and took his hand. What are you doing, girl? Dr. Mills snapped. No one should suffer alone, she replied simply, meeting the doctor's irritated gaze with calm resolve. The injured man's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to a hint of gratitude as Florence squeezed his hand gently. Get her out of here, Dr. Mills barked to his assistant. I need to get this bullet out now. 2 strong hands gripped Florence's shoulders, pulling her to her feet. She turned to find herself face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered man she recognized as one of the ranch hands from the Valentine spread outside of town. Come on, miss, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such an imposing figure. Doc needs space to work. Florence allowed herself to be led away, but not before retrieving her basket. Will he survive? She asked, glancing back at the injured man. Hard to say. Caught a bullet in a card game dispute. Not the first, won't be the last. The ranch hand studied her with curious green eyes. Most ladies don't stick around for the bloody parts. I'm not most ladies, mister. Valentine, August Valentine, he tipped his hat. And you must be Miss Harper from the boarding house. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks, surprised that this man knew who she was. August Valentine was a name she'd heard mentioned around town, the foreman of his father's substantial cattle operation, the Valentine Ranch. Unlike most cowboys who blew through Fort Worth in a cloud of dust and whiskey, The Valentines were established, respected. Florence Harper, she confirmed. I'm surprised you know me. A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Word travels in a town this size. The Easterner who brings flowers to graves with no names. The woman who reads to Mrs. Simmons even though the old lady's too blind to know who's there. The one who patched up Billy Porter's dog when everyone else said to put it down. Florence shifted uncomfortably. People talk too much. People always talk. Question is whether what they're saying is worth hearing. August glanced down at her basket of wildflowers. Those for the boarding house. She nodded. Aunt Gertrude thinks it's a waste of time, but I think a bit of beauty makes any place more welcoming. August reached into the basket and gently touched a bluebonnet. My mother used to say the same thing before the fever took her. Something in his voice made Florence look up sharply. Behind the weathered tan and the quiet strength, she caught a glimpse of an old pain carefully buried. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from down the street. Valentine, your men are tearing up the place again. Sheriff Dawson bellowed, storming toward them with his hand on his holstered pistol. August straightened, the momentary connection between them severed. Excuse me, Miss Harper. He tipped his hat again and turned to intercept the approaching lawman. Florence watched him go, struck by the contrast between his gentle manner with her and the authoritative stance he now assumed, facing down the sheriff with quiet confidence. He was nothing like the rowdy cowboys who typically came through Fort Worth, yet something told her August Valentine was every bit as dangerous in his own way. As she continued toward the boarding house, she couldn't help wondering if she just met the rare sort of man who might understand that gentleness wasn't weakness, that in a land as harsh as this, perhaps it was the greatest strength of all. Florence pushed open the door of the boarding house, the familiar smell of baking bread and furniture polish greeting her. Aunt Gertrude stood at the front desk, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyeglasses perched on the end of her nose as she recorded entries in the ledger. You're late, her aunt said without looking up, and I see you've been gathering weeds again. Florence bit back a sigh. They're wildflowers, Aunt Gertrude, and yes, I thought they might brighten the dining room. Gertrude Harper finally glanced up, her expression softening fractionally at the sight of her niece's hopeful face. She was not an unkind woman, merely practical, hardened by 30 years on the frontier after losing her husband to Apache raiders. The boarding house was her life, her security, and she ran it with military precision. There was a shooting, Florence added, moving toward the kitchen to find a vase. Outside the saloon. When isn't there? Gertrude muttered, following her, and I suppose you stopped to help as usual. Florence filled a plain glass vase with water. It was outside Dr. Mill's office. I only offered comfort. Gertrude shook her head. Florence, we've discussed this. Men who get shot in this town usually deserve it. It's not your place to intervene. No one deserves to suffer alone, Florence replied quietly, arranging the flowers with deft fingers. And that kind of thinking is why people talk about you the way they do. Gertrude's voice held genuine concern beneath the criticism. I promised your father I'd look after you, but you make it difficult when you refuse to adapt to the realities of life here. Florence carried the vase to the dining room table, where it provided the only spot of vibrant color in the otherwise practical space. I met August Valentine today, she said, changing the subject. Gertrude's eyebrows rose. Did you now? And what did the youngest Valentine want with you? He helped me away from the shooting. He was kind. Kind isn't a word often associated with the Valentines, though they're fair businessmen. Gertrude studied her niece with narrowed eyes. That family runs the largest cattle operation in the county. They didn't get there by being soft. He mentioned his mother, Florence said. She died of fever. Gertrude's expression softened slightly. Yes, about 10 years ago, Victoria Valentine was one of the few ladies of genuine refinement in these parts. After she passed, Old Man Valentine threw himself into expanding the ranch, and the boy, well, August turned from a scholarly lad to his father's right hand. Doesn't say much, but when he does, folks listen. Florence absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she'd briefly encountered. He knew who I was, knew about the flowers and Mrs. Simmons and Billy's dog. Like I said, people talk, Gertrude sighed. Florence, I understand your nature. Your mother was the same God, rest her soul, but this isn't Boston. Out here, your kind of softness makes you vulnerable. Maybe the West needs more softness, not less, Florence countered, straightening the vase. Maybe that's how civilization truly advances. Gertrude shook her head but didn't argue further. The McKinneys arrive on tomorrow's stage. Make sure room 3 is ready. She turned to go, then paused. And Florence? The Valentines are coming into town for supplies tomorrow. August usually handles their business. I'd appreciate if you'd stay inside and help with the laundry. Florence frowned. Are you trying to keep me away from him? I'm trying to keep you from becoming another piece of town gossip. The Valentine men aren't known for dalliances, but they're not looking for wives either, especially not Eastern girls who think they can change the nature of the frontier with flowers and kind words. With that, Gertrude returned to her ledger, leaving Florence alone with her thoughts. She touched the soft petals of a bluebonnet, thinking of the way August Valentine's calloused fingers had done the same, so careful, as if remembering how to be gentle. Despite her aunt's warning, Florence found herself looking forward to tomorrow, curious about the quiet cowboy who seemed to notice things others missed. Morning arrived with the relentless Texas sun already beating down by 8 o'clock. Florence had risen early to help prepare breakfast for the boarding house guests, currently 2 traveling salesmen and an elderly couple waiting for their son to send for them from California. As she served plates of eggs and bacon, her mind kept returning to her brief encounter with August Valentine. "More coffee, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked the older of the salesmen, who nodded gratefully. "You're a treasure, Miss Harper," he said as she filled his cup. "A genuine ray of sunshine in this dusty excuse for a town," his companion chuckled. "Don't let the locals hear you say that. They think Fort Worth's the crown jewel of Texas." "It has its charms," Florence defended mildly, though in truth, she still struggled to see the appeal of the rough-hewn settlement compared to the tree-lined streets of Boston. After breakfast, Florence dutifully began the laundry as Aunt Gertrude had requested, but found herself positioned near the window that overlooked the main street. Just after 10 o'clock, she spotted a group of riders approaching 5 men on horseback, with August Valentine easily recognizable at the front. Unlike the others, he rode with a quiet confidence rather than the showy swagger typical of cowboys. They dismounted outside the general store, and Florence watched as August gave instructions to his men before they dispersed to various businesses along the street. He himself headed toward the bank, his long strides purposeful, nodding acknowledgments to townspeople who greeted him. Florence was so engrossed in watching him that she didn't hear her aunt enter the room. "I see the Valentine crew has arrived," Gertrude observed dryly. "And I see you found the poorest vantage point for doing laundry but the best for spying on the street." Florence jumped, nearly knocking over the wash basin. I was just taking a moment to rest my arms. Gertrude was unconvinced. "Well, since you're so interested in the goings-on outside, you can deliver this list to Mr. Benson at the general store. We're running low on supplies." Florence accepted the list, trying to hide her eagerness. "What about the laundry?" "It'll wait. The stage is due at noon with the McKinneys, and I'd like to have those items before they arrive." Minutes later, Florence stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, list clutched in hand. The mid-morning sun was fierce, and she was grateful for her wide-brimmed bonnet. As she approached the general store, she saw 2 of the Valentine Ranch hands loading supplies onto a wagon while engaging in good-natured banter with some local men. Inside, Mr. Benson was already assisting August Valentine, who was reviewing a substantial order list while the shopkeeper gathered items. "Good morning, Mr. Benson," Florence said, nodding politely to August as well. "Aunt Gertrude sent me with her order." Miss Harper, August acknowledged with a tip of his hat. His eyes seemed to brighten at the sight of her, though his expression remained composed. Mr. Benson took Gertrude's list. I'll get to this right after Mr. Valentine's order, Miss Harper. Might be a bit of a wait. I don't mind, she replied, moving to browse the shelves of dry goods. August finished his business efficiently, then surprised her by lingering. How's the man from yesterday? He asked. The one who caught the bullet. I don't know, I haven't heard anything. August nodded thoughtfully. Not many would have done what you did staying with him like that. It wasn't much, just human decency. Decency's in short supply these days. He studied her with those penetrating green eyes. Most people who have been in Fort Worth more than a month develop a certain callousness. Florence moved toward the display of fabric bolts, running her fingers over a length of calico. My father used to say that hardening your heart might protect you from pain, but it also blocks out joy. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. She felt the familiar pang of grief. He taught literature at a small college in Massachusetts. We'd read poetry together in the evenings. August leaned against the counter. Poetry seems a long way from Fort Worth. Everything I love seems a long way from Fort Worth, she admitted, then blushed at her candor. I'm sorry, that was uncharitable. To her surprise, August smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. No need to apologize for honesty, Miss Harper. The West requires adjustments for everyone, especially those accustomed to more civilized surroundings. Do you find it uncivilized here? She asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. I find it unfinished. He glanced out the window at the dusty street, like a painting half complete. The raw elements are here for something magnificent, but it takes vision to see it and patience to help it emerge. Florence was struck by the unexpected poetry in his assessment. That's a beautiful way to think of it. Mr. Benson cleared his throat. Your order's ready, Mr. Valentine. The boys can load it up whenever you're set. August nodded his thanks but seemed reluctant to leave. After a moment's hesitation, he turned back to Florence. Miss Harper, the ranch is hosting a social gathering this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and friends for dinner and some music. Your aunt is already invited, of course. I'd be honored if you'd consider attending as well. Florence tried to hide her surprise. A social gathering at the Valentine Ranch, my father's idea, actually, says we need to remind folks we're not just cattle and business. There was a hint of amusement in his voice. We do it twice a year. Bit of civilization in the wilderness, you might say. Before Florence could respond, the store door burst open and Sheriff Dawson strode in, his expression grim. Valentine, we got trouble. 3 of your steers were found slaughtered just north of town. Rustlers took the rest of the herd. They separated maybe 30 head. August's demeanor changed instantly, his posture straightening, jaw tightening. When? Last night, looks like. One of your men just rode in to report it. Without another word, August tipped his hat to Florence. Excuse me, Miss Harper. Mr. Benson, have my men load the supplies. I'll settle the account next time. He strode out, already calling to his ranch hands. Florence watched through the window as August mounted his horse in one fluid motion, spoke briefly to his men, then galloped out of town with 2 riders following close behind. The transformation from the thoughtful man discussing poetry and civilization to the hard-riding cowboy pursuing rustlers was startling. That's the West for you, Miss Harper, Mr. Benson commented, noting her expression. One minute you're planning a social, the next you're chasing thieves who just as soon put a bullet in you as look at you. Florence frowned. Will they be in danger? August Valentine can handle himself, Mr. Benson assured her as he began gathering items from Gertrude's list. Man's got a reputation for being fair but firm. Doesn't draw his gun unless necessary, but when he does. The shopkeeper left the implication hanging. Florence thought of August's gentle touch on the bluebonnet petals, the thoughtful way he spoke about the frontier. It was difficult to reconcile that man with someone who could hunt down rustlers and potentially engage in gunfire. Ain't seen him take a particular interest in anyone since he came back from that school back east," Mr. Benson continued, his tone casual but his eyes shrewd. "His daddy sent him to college for a year or two, came back when his mama took sick." Florence absorbed this new piece of information. "He went to college, up in St. Louis, I believe, studying to be an engineer or some such, gave it all up to help run the ranch after Victoria passed." Mr. Benson handed Florence a small candy stick. "On the house, Miss Harper, you bring a bit of refinement to our humble establishment." Florence accepted the candy with a smile, though her mind was elsewhere following a serious-faced cowboy with educated eyes who seemed to understand both poetry and pistols, gentleness and grit. By the time she returned to the boarding house, the stage had arrived with the McKinneys, and the next several hours were consumed with helping them settle in. It wasn't until evening, as she sat on the small back porch shelling peas for tomorrow's dinner, that Florence had a moment to reflect on the day's events. "Mind if I join you?" Aunt Gertrude appeared with her own basket of mending. "Please do." Florence moved over on the bench. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Gertrude spoke. "I heard about the rustlers at the Valentine place. Bad business. Do you think they'll catch them? If anyone can, August will. He's got a cool head on his shoulders, unlike most men around here who shoot first and think later." Gertrude's needle moved efficiently through the fabric of a torn tablecloth. "I also heard he invited you to their gathering on Saturday." Florence's fingers paused briefly in their work. "News travels fast. In Fort Worth, at the speed of sound." Gertrude set down her mending. "Florence, I want you to understand something about the Valentines. They're good people, honorable, fair, but they live by frontier rules. Victor Valentine built that ranch from nothing, fighting Comanches and drought and cattle thieves. August may have some education, but he's his father's son." "What are you trying to say, Aunt Gertrude?" "I'm saying be careful. I see the way you looked when you mentioned him yesterday. A man like August Valentine might admire your gentleness, might even be drawn to it, but at the end of the day he lives in a world where softness is a luxury few can afford." Florence's chin lifted slightly. "Perhaps you underestimate both of us," Gertrude sighed. "I hope I do, dear. I truly hope I do." After a pause, she added, "We'll go to the gathering on Saturday. The McKinneys will be settled by then, and Mrs. Peterson can watch the house for an evening." Florence tried to contain her smile but failed. "Thank you, Aunt Gertrude. Don't thank me yet." Her aunt picked up her mending again. "Victor Valentine is a formidable man. His approval doesn't come easily, especially when it comes to potential matches for his only son. I never said anything about, you didn't have to, dear." Gertrude's eyes held a mix of concern and affection. "Just remember who you are. Your gentleness is not a flaw to be corrected, no matter what this town might say. It's your strength, though it may take a special kind of man to recognize that." The next few days passed in a flurry of boarding house duties. Florence heard from town gossip that August and his men had tracked the rustlers to a camp 20 miles north, but had only recovered a portion of the stolen cattle. The thieves themselves had fled before the Valentine crew arrived. By Saturday morning, Florence found herself unusually anxious about the evening ahead. She laid out her best dress, a modest blue silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, brought from Boston and seldom worn in Fort Worth. "It's just a ranch gathering," Gertrude reminded her as they prepared to leave that afternoon. "Not a Boston society ball." "I know," Florence replied, securing her bonnet, "but it's nice to have an occasion for something other than calico." They traveled to the Valentine Ranch in a rented buggy, following a winding dirt road that led 5 miles outside of town. As they crested a hill, Florence gasped at the vista before them, a sprawling ranch house of substantial size, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided rare shade in the Texas landscape. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Victor Valentine chose the spot for that creek. Gertrude explained. "Water's worth more than gold out here." As they approached, Florence could see other buggies and horses already gathered. The house itself was impressive 2 stories of sturdy construction with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Unlike most frontier homes built purely for function, this one showed touches of refinement: glass windows, painted trim, even flower boxes with bright blooms. Victoria's influence, Gertrude noted, following Florence's gaze to the flowers. She insisted on bringing beauty to the practical. August has maintained her garden since she passed. Florence felt a flutter in her stomach at this revelation, remembering August's gentle touch on the bluebonnets in her basket. A ranch hand helped them down from the buggy, and they joined the flow of guests making their way to the house. Inside, the main room had been cleared for the gathering, with long tables set up for dining and space created for music and dancing afterward. About 30 people milled about: neighboring ranchers, business associates from town, and their families. Florence scanned the room, trying not to be obvious in her search for August. Instead, she found herself face to face with an older man whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Tall and broad-shouldered like his son, Victor Valentine had weathered features and steel-gray hair. His eyes the same striking green as August's assessed her with frank curiosity. "You must be Miss Harper," he said, his voice deep and direct. "Gertrude's niece from back east." "Yes, sir. Thank you for inviting us to your home. It's lovely." Victor nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. "My late wife's doing, mostly. She believed a home should be more than just shelter." His gaze remained thoughtful. "I understand you've made quite an impression in town." Florence wasn't sure how to respond to this ambiguous statement. "I'm still adjusting to life here, Mr. Valentine." "So I've heard. Not everyone adapts to frontier ways." There was neither criticism nor approval in his tone, merely observation. Gertrude stepped in smoothly. "Victor, the place looks wonderful. Victoria would be proud of how you've maintained it." Victor's expression softened slightly at the mention of his wife. August seized to most of that, speaking of whom he glanced over Florence's shoulder. "Here he is now." Florence turned to see August entering from a side door. He'd clearly made an effort for the occasion, dressed in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that, while practical, were a far cry from the dusty range clothes she'd seen him in previously. He spotted them immediately, and Florence felt a rush of warmth at the way his eyes lingered on her. "Miss Harper, Aunt Gertrude," he greeted them, tipping his head respectfully. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it," Gertrude replied. "I was just telling your father what a fine place you've maintained here." August's gaze remained on Florence. "Would you like a tour of the grounds before dinner, Miss Harper? My mother's garden is particularly nice this time of year." Victor raised an eyebrow but nodded his approval. "Go on, son. Show the lady around. Gertrude and I have some catching up to do." Florence couldn't help noticing the speculative glances and whispered comments as August led her through the crowded room and out onto the porch. It seemed their interaction was already fodder for gossip. "I'm glad you came," August said once they were outside in the late afternoon sunlight. "I wasn't sure if you would." "Why wouldn't I?" He gave her a knowing look. "Fort Worth has likely made it clear that the Harper and Valentine families occupy different circles. And do we?" Florence challenged gently. August guided her down the porch steps toward a fenced garden area. "That's what I'm trying to determine." As they walked, Florence became aware of the peaceful beauty of the ranch. After months in dusty Fort Worth, the green pastures and flowing creek were a balm to her senses. They reached a gate that August opened, revealing a carefully tended garden bursting with flowers, herbs, and vegetables. "My mother started this the first year they settled here," he explained as they strolled along a stone path. "Father thought it was foolishness at first using precious water for flowers when they were trying to establish a cattle herd." A fond smile touched his lips. She told him a ranch needed beauty as much as beef. Eventually, he came to agree. Florence took in the colorful riot of Bloom's roses, zinnias, marigolds, and native wildflowers, all arranged with care. It's magnificent. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. August stopped beside a rose bush heavy with crimson blooms. She would have liked you, I think. Because I bring flowers to the boarding house, Florence asked with a small smile, because you understand what she knew that gentleness has its own kind of power. He hesitated, then added, I heard about what happened after I left town the other day, about how you visited that injured man at Dr. Mill's office, brought him books while he recovered. Florence felt her cheeks warm. It seemed the decent thing to do, no one else was checking on him. Because he was a stranger passing through, a card sharp with no connections here. August studied her face. Most people wouldn't have bothered. I'm not most people, Mr. Valentine. No, he agreed softly. You most certainly are not. He reached out and carefully cut one of the roses, removing the thorns with a small pocket knife before offering it to her. Sometimes I think we forget what civilization really means out here. We're so busy surviving that we lose sight of why survival matters in the first place. Florence accepted the rose, their fingers brushing briefly. And why does it matter? So we can build something worth more than mere existence, something with beauty and meaning. His voice had dropped lower, and Florence was acutely aware of how close they stood, partially hidden from the house by the garden foliage. The moment was broken by the dinner bell ringing from the house. August offered his arm. Shall we? As they walked back, Florence noticed several curious and surprised looks directed their way her with a rose in hand. August with an attentiveness he apparently rarely displayed. The evening progressed with a substantial dinner served family style, followed by music from a small group of ranch hands who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and guitar. Throughout the meal, Florence found herself seated between August and a cattle buyer from San Antonio, with Victor Valentine positioned directly across from her. The older Valentine observed her carefully throughout the evening, his expression giving little away. When the dancing began, August stood and offered his hand. Miss Harper, Florence accepted, aware of the murmurs that followed them to the cleared space serving as a dance floor. August proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her confidently through a waltz. People are talking, she observed quietly. People always talk, he replied, echoing their first conversation. Question is whether what they're saying is worth hearing. And what are they saying now, do you think? His eyes held her steadily as they moved across the floor. That August Valentine, who's shown no interest in any woman since returning from St. Louis 5 years ago, seems remarkably attentive to the gentle Easterner who brings flowers to graves and comfort to strangers. Florence felt her heart quicken. And is that accurate? Entirely. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Though they're likely also saying it won't last, that a woman like you is too soft for a place like this, and a man like me is too hardened by this land to appreciate such gentleness for long. And is that accurate? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. August's steps slowed as the music came to an end, but he didn't immediately release her. No, he said simply. That's where they're wrong. Before Florence could respond, Victor Valentine approached them. Mind if I borrow Miss Harper for the next dance, son? August reluctantly stepped back. Of course not, father. As the music began again, Florence found herself guided around the floor by the elder Valentine. Despite his age, he moved with the same natural grace as his son. My boy seems quite taken with you, Victor said without preamble. Florence wasn't sure how to respond to such directness. Mr. Valentine, August is all I have left in this world, Miss Harper, he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. He gave up his own dreams to come back here when his mother took ill, never complained once, just shouldered the burden of this ranch alongside me. He seems to care deeply about this place, Florence offered. Victor nodded. He does. But caring about something and being fulfilled by it are different matters. I see him watching the sunset sometimes with a look that tells me his mind is elsewhere, thinking about bridges and buildings he might have designed if things had been different. Florence was surprised by this confidence. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Valentine?" Victor's green eyes, so like his son's but harder, more weathered by life's trials, assessed her carefully. "Because I see the way he looks at you. Like you're a bridge to somewhere he thought he couldn't go anymore." The music drew to a close and Victor stepped back. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Harper." As he walked away, Florence felt a strange mix of emotions: confusion at Victor's cryptic words, concern about the expectations they might carry, and an undeniable warmth at the thought that August might see something special in her despite the town's constant criticism of her gentle nature. The evening continued with more dancing and conversation. Florence found herself repeatedly sought out by August, who introduced her to neighboring ranchers and their wives. To her surprise, several of the women expressed genuine pleasure at meeting her. "We've heard about your kindnesses around town," Mrs. Peterson, a rancher's wife, told her. "It's refreshing to see someone who hasn't let the harshness of this place turn their heart to stone." As the gathering began to wind down, August escorted Florence and Gertrude to their buggy. Victor had already bid them good night, with a parting comment that they were welcome at the ranch anytime. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," August told Florence as he helped her up into the seat. "Perhaps we could continue our conversation after church services." "I'd like that," she replied, suddenly shy under Gertrude's watchful gaze. As they drove back toward Fort Worth, Gertrude was uncharacteristically quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. "Well, that was enlightening." "What do you mean?" "I mean Victor Valentine just gave his blessing to his son's interest in you, which I never thought I'd see." Gertrude shook her head in wonder. "That man turned away the daughter of a cattle baron from San Antonio last year because he didn't think she had the right temperament for ranch life. Yet he practically pushed you and August together all evening." Florence absently touched the rose she'd carefully preserved. "Maybe he sees something in me that others don't." "Maybe," Gertrude agreed thoughtfully. "Or maybe he sees what August needs rather than what the ranch needs. There's a difference." The next morning after church services, Florence found August waiting outside as promised. They walked together through the quieter streets of Fort Worth, talking easily about books they'd both read, experiences from their different upbringings, and their shared appreciation for beauty in unexpected places. "Would you consider accompanying me on a ride next Saturday?" August asked as they approached the boarding house. "There's a place on the ranch I'd like to show you." Florence hesitated, aware of the potential impropriety, but August quickly added, "Mrs. Peterson has already agreed to join us as a chaperone. She and her husband have been neighbors since before I was born." With that assurance, Florence agreed, and the following Saturday found her riding across Valentine land on a gentle mare, with August beside her and Mrs. Peterson following at a discreet distance. August led them to a ridge overlooking a bend in the creek, where cottonwood trees created a natural canopy. The spot afforded a breathtaking view of the surrounding landscape: rolling hills, distant mesas, and the sprawling ranch below. "My mother used to come here to read," August explained as they dismounted. "Said it was where she could remember why she'd fallen in love with this wild country, even on days when it seemed determined to break her spirit." Florence moved to the edge of the ridge, taking in the vista. "It's magnificent." "It is," August agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the view. "Florence," it was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a flutter through her chest. "I've never met anyone quite like you. Most people who come west either break under its harshness or become as hard as the land itself. But you've remained true to your nature despite everything." Florence smiled ruefully. "According to most of Fort Worth, that's my failing." "No," the word was firm, almost fierce. "It's your greatest strength. When I first came back from St. Louis, I thought I had to bury the part of myself that appreciated beauty, poetry, gentleness. I thought being my father's son meant becoming as unyielding as he is." He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. Then I saw you kneeling beside a stranger, holding his hand while he bled. Saw you bringing flowers to unnamed graves. Watched you read to a blind woman who couldn't even thank you properly. And I realized what I'd forgotten, what this whole territory is in danger of forgetting. What's that? Florence asked softly. That true strength isn't about hardening your heart, it's about keeping it soft in a world determined to turn it to stone. August took her hand in his. Your gentleness, Florence, it reminded me of who I wanted to be before life intervened. In a way, it saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. The simple honesty in his words moved her deeply. August, Miss Harper, Mr. Valentine, Mrs. Peterson called from where she waited with the horses. Storms brewing to the west, we should head back. Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, the wind already picking up. August reluctantly released Florence's hand and they hastened back to the horses. They rode quickly, but the storm moved faster. When the first heavy raindrops began to fall, August led them to a lined shack used by the ranch hands during roundup, a simple one-room structure but solid enough to provide shelter. We'll wait it out here, he decided, helping Florence dismount. These summer storms usually pass quickly, Mrs. Peterson looked doubtful as thunder crashed overhead. My Arthur will be worried sick if I'm not back by dark. I'll send a ranch hand to your place as soon as we return, August assured her. Let him know you're safe. Inside, the shack was basic but clean: a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. August lit a lamp while Mrs. Peterson fussed with her damp skirts, clearly uncomfortable with the situation despite August's impeccable behavior. The storm intensified, rain hammering on the roof and lightning illuminating the small space through its single window. Florence found herself unexpectedly enjoying the enforced pause, listening as August told stories about growing up on the ranch, learning to track from an old Comanche who worked for his father, falling into the creek while trying to impress a girl when he was 12, finding an abandoned wolf cub and raising it until it eventually returned to the wild. You have a gift for storytelling, Florence observed after a particularly vivid tale about his first cattle drive. My mother read to me every night, he explained. Said stories were as important as saddles in making a complete human being. Mrs. Peterson had gradually relaxed, even contributing her own tales of frontier life. As the rain began to slacken, she peered out the window. Looks like it's passing, August nodded. We should be able to make it back before dark. The ride back to the ranch house was muddy but uneventful. True to his word, August immediately sent a hand to the Peterson place with news of their safety. He then insisted on personally escorting Florence back to town despite the late hour. It's not necessary, she protested. You've already done enough. I insist, he replied, his tone brooking no argument. The roads will be treacherous after the rain. They traveled in a covered buggy, the journey taking longer than usual due to the muddy conditions. As they approached Fort Worth, August finally broached the subject that had been interrupted on the ridge. Florence, I know we haven't known each other long, but I find myself thinking about you constantly. His hands were steady on the reins, but his voice held a hint of uncharacteristic uncertainty. I'd like your permission to call on you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, could grow into something more. In the dim light of the buggy's small lantern, Florence studied his profile, the strong jaw, the serious eyes now turned toward her, waiting for her answer. I'd like that very much, she replied softly. The smile that transformed his face was worth all the mud and rain and impropriety of their adventure. As they pulled up to the boarding house, they saw Gertrude waiting anxiously on the porch. Thank heaven, she exclaimed as they approached. I was about to send Sheriff Dawson out looking for you. My fault entirely, Mrs. Harper, August said immediately. The storm caught us, and I insisted on seeing Florence safely back. Gertrude's eyebrows rose at his use of Florence's given name, but she merely nodded. Well, you're both here now. Come in and dry off before you head back, Mr. Valentine. It's a long ride to the ranch. Over the next few weeks, August became a regular visitor at the boarding house. He came into town every Sunday after church, and often once or twice during the week on ranch business, always making time to call on Florence. They walked together through town, sat on the boarding house porch in the evenings, and occasionally rode out to the ranch when Gertrude could be persuaded to accompany them. To Florence's surprise, the town's attitude toward her began to shift. The very qualities that had once been mocked, her gentleness, her compassion, her insistence on bringing beauty to harsh surroundings, were now viewed through the lens of August Valentine's obvious admiration. If the Valentine heir valued such things, perhaps they weren't so impractical after all. One Tuesday afternoon in late July, Florence was arranging flowers in the boarding house parlor when she heard a commotion in the street. Looking out the window, she saw a wagon speeding into town, one of the Valentine ranch hands driving frantically while another held a blood-soaked companion in the back. Without hesitation, Florence rushed outside and followed the wagon to Dr. Mill's office. Inside, she found chaos, the doctor barking orders as they transferred the injured man to the examination table. "What happened?" she asked the driver, who looked pale with shock. "Rustlers," he managed. "Hit the south pasture. August went after them with 4 men. Ambush. Miguel took a bullet. August sent us back with him while they continued pursuit." Florence felt her blood run cold. "August is still out there, chasing armed rustlers," the ranch hand nodded grimly. "With 3 men against at least 6 thieves. They killed 2 of our best horses before we even knew what was happening." Florence moved to assist Dr. Mills, who for once didn't shoo her away, likely because his regular assistant was out of town. She held instruments, passed bandages, and spoke soothingly to Miguel as the doctor extracted the bullet from his shoulder. "He'll live," Dr. Mills announced finally. "But he needs rest and watching for fever." "I'll stay with him," Florence offered immediately. Dr. Mills studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Perhaps your presence will keep him calm. Send for me if his condition changes." The hours crawled by with no word from August or the men with him. Florence sat beside Miguel, bathing his forehead when fever set in, speaking gentle words of encouragement when he surfaced from pain-induced sleep. Night fell, and still no news. Gertrude brought food and tried to convince Florence to come home, but she refused to leave her post. It was past midnight when the door to the doctor's office finally opened. August stood there, his clothes dirty and torn, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left forearm. His face was haggard with exhaustion, but his eyes sought Florence immediately. "Miguel?" he asked, his voice rough. "Sleeping," she replied, rising from her chair. Dr. Mills removed the bullet. "He'll recover." August's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank God." Florence moved to him, gently taking his injured arm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." His free hand came up to touch her face, as if assuring himself she was real. "They said you've been here all day." "Of course I have." She led him to a chair, unwrapping the crude bandage to examine the wound beneath. It was indeed a graze, but deep enough to require cleaning and proper bandaging. "What happened?" As she tended to his injury, August explained in terse sentences how they had tracked the rustlers into a narrow canyon, exchanged gunfire, and eventually recovered most of the stolen cattle. 2 of the thieves had been killed in the confrontation, the rest escaping into rough country too dangerous to traverse in the dark. "Sheriff Dawson and a posse will go after them tomorrow," he concluded as Florence tied off a fresh bandage. "Though I doubt they'll find them now." There was something in his tone, a weariness beyond physical exhaustion, that made Florence look up sharply. "What is it? What aren't you telling me?" August sighed, running his good hand through his dusty hair. "One of the men we killed, I recognized him. Charlie Benton. Used to work for us 3 years ago before I caught him stealing and let him go." He shook his head. "He was hardly more than a boy, Florence. 20, maybe 21. Now he's dead over a few head of cattle." The regret in his voice touched her deeply. While most men in his position would have felt only satisfaction at eliminating a threat to their livelihood, August saw the human cost the waste of a young life, however misguided. "You didn't have a choice," she said softly, her hand finding his. "Didn't I?" His green eyes, usually so clear, were clouded with doubt. "Sometimes I wonder if there's another way to live out here, one that doesn't require blood for every transgression, hardness for every challenge." Florence squeezed his hand. "I believe there is." "I have to believe that, or what am I doing here?" August studied her face in the lamplight, his expression softening. "You're reminding the rest of us what we're working toward, what civilization should actually mean." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Your gentleness, Florence, it saved me today. When I had that boy in my sights, I remembered your face. I aimed to wound, not kill." He fired back and Hank returned fire. He trailed off, the implication clear. August had tried to show mercy, but the situation had spiraled beyond his control. "You tried," she whispered. "That matters." August rose from the chair, wincing slightly at the movement. "I should check on Miguel, then get back to the ranch. Father will be waiting for news." "Let me come with you," Florence said impulsively. "To see Miguel, I mean. I've been watching over him all day." August nodded, and they moved quietly to where Miguel lay sleeping fitfully on the doctor's examination table. Florence adjusted his blanket, checked his fever with a touch to his forehead, and spoke a few soft words in the halting Spanish she'd been learning since arriving in Texas. August watched her with an expression that made her heart quicken. When Miguel settled back into sleep, they stepped outside into the cool night air. "I should go," August said reluctantly. "Dawn will come too soon and there's much to be done." Florence nodded. "Will I see you Sunday?" "Sooner." His voice was firm. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on Miguel. Perhaps we could have dinner at the hotel restaurant. I'd like that." August hesitated, then stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "Florence, today made me realize something. Life out here is uncertain, dangerous, often brutal. I don't want to waste whatever time we have." Before she could respond, he bent and brushed his lips against hers, a feather-light touch, gentle and questioning. When she didn't pull away, he deepened the kiss, one hand moving to cradle her face. Florence had been kissed before, quick, furtive things from eager Boston boys that had left her largely unimpressed. This was entirely different. August kissed her as if she were precious, as if he'd been thinking about this moment for weeks, as if he wanted to memorize the feeling. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, August rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Florence Harper. I think I have been since I saw you holding that stranger's hand while he bled in the street." The simple honesty of his declaration moved her more than any flowery speech could have. "And I with you, August Valentine. Even if half the town thinks I'm too soft and the other half thinks you're too good for me." August chuckled softly. "Then they've got it exactly backward." He straightened, reluctantly releasing her. "I really must go. Father will have the whole ranch out looking for me if I don't return soon." "Go," she urged, though everything in her wanted him to stay. "Be safe." With one final, lingering kiss, August mounted his horse and rode into the darkness, leaving Florence standing outside the doctor's office with her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible in this harsh land. The following weeks saw a change in Fort Worth's attitude toward Florence. News of August Valentine's interest in her had transformed the town's perception of her gentleness from weakness to virtue. The very people who had once mocked her for reading to Mrs. Simmons now greeted her warmly on the street. The women who had whispered about her wasting water on flowers now asked for cuttings and advice. Remarkable how quickly opinions change when a Valentine is involved, Gertrude observed dryly one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. Florence smoothed her skirts. "It's not just August's name. I think people are starting to see that there's room for kindness here, that it doesn't have to be all hardness and struggle." "Perhaps," Gertrude allowed. "Or perhaps they're simply hedging their bets in case you become the future Mrs. Valentine." Florence blushed at the suggestion, though it wasn't the first time she'd heard it. August's intentions had become increasingly clear with each passing day. He called on her regularly, brought her books from his mother's collection, and had even begun including her in discussions about improvements to the ranch house, particularly the garden, which he wanted to expand in her honor. Victor Valentine, too, had shown his approval, inviting Florence and Gertrude to Sunday dinners and treating Florence with a gruff kindness that seemed to surprise even August. "He likes you," August had told her during a walk along the creek near the ranch house. "Says you remind him of my mother not in appearance, but in spirit." She, too, insisted on bringing gentleness to a place that often punished it. September brought cooler weather, and the annual Fort Worth Harvest Festival a modest affair by Eastern standards, but the social event of the season for the small frontier community. The town square was decorated with bunting and lanterns, tables groaned with food brought by every family, and a wooden platform had been constructed for dancing. Florence wore her finest dress, a deep green silk that August had once mentioned matched his eyes. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with a single white rose from the Valentine garden. "You look beautiful," August murmured when he came to escort her and Gertrude to the festival. He himself had made an effort, wearing a crisp white shirt, black vest, and a string tie as formal as a rancher ever got in Fort Worth. The evening was magical. They danced beneath the stars, August holding her closer than propriety strictly allowed, but not so close as to cause scandal. They shared food from each other's plates, laughed with friends, and participated in the traditional harvest games with childlike enjoyment. As the night drew on, August led Florence away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the church. The music from the square provided a distant backdrop as he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Florence," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous, "I've been trying to find the perfect words, the perfect moment. But I'm beginning to think there's no such thing, just the truth, simply spoken." Florence's heart began to race as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I love you," he continued. "I love your gentleness in a world that too often mistakes cruelty for strength. I love how you've reminded me of the man I wanted to be before life hardened me. I love that you bring flowers to unnamed graves and comfort to strangers and beauty to every corner of this dusty town." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, producing a small velvet box that he opened to reveal a ring, a delicate gold band set with a perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Father gave it to me last week with his blessing." Florence felt tears spring to her eyes as August continued, "Florence Harper, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of bringing your gentle heart to our home, our children, our future?" "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, August, with all my heart, yes." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration that gentleness and strength could exist together, that one without the other was incomplete. When they finally returned to the festival, hand in hand with the pearl ring catching the light of the lanterns, a cheer went up from the gathered townspeople. Gertrude was the first to embrace Florence, tears in her usually stoic eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "Not because you're marrying well, though Victor Valentine's son is certainly a catch, but because you've remained true to yourself in a place that tried its best to change you." Victor Valentine approached next, clapping his son on the shoulder before taking Florence's hand and examining the ring with approval. "Looks right," he said gruffly. "Victoria would have been pleased." Then, to Florence's surprise, he bent and kissed her cheek. "Welcome to the family, daughter." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. August wanted a short engagement, and with Florence in full agreement, the wedding was set for November 1st, just 6 weeks away. The Valentine ranch house buzzed with activity as rooms were refreshed, furniture polished, and the garden prepared for its role as the wedding venue. Florence threw herself into the planning with joy, but also found time to continue her acts of kindness around town now with August often at her side. Together, they visited Mrs. Simmons, brought flowers to the cemetery, and even established a small lending library in a corner of the general store using books from both their collections. To Florence's delight, several town children began to visit the library regularly. August took particular interest in a 10-year-old boy named Tommy Jenkins, whose quick mind and love of learning reminded him of himself at that age. That boy should have schooling beyond what Fort Worth can provide, August remarked one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. He has a mind for engineering. Perhaps we could help with that, Florence suggested. A scholarship of sorts. August's eyes lit up at the idea. The first of many, I hope. This town needs more than cattle and commerce to truly thrive. Such conversations about education, community improvement, and bringing civilization in its truest sense to the frontier became a regular part of their evenings. Florence found in August not just a loving fiancé but a true partner who shared her vision of what the West could become. "I've been thinking," August said one evening just 2 weeks before the wedding. They had taken a walk to the creek that ran behind the Valentine property, their favorite spot for private conversations. About the ranch house. "What about it?" Florence asked, curious at his serious tone. "It's a good house. Solid, but it was built for my parents' vision, not ours." He took her hands in his. "I'd like to build something new. On that ridge I showed you the one with the view my mother loved. A home designed for our family with space for a proper library, music, art." Florence felt a rush of emotion at the thought. "But your father approves," August assured her. "He'll keep the main house, of course. Says he's too old to move and the hands are used to things as they are. But he agrees we should start our marriage in our own home, one that reflects who we are together." "Can we afford it?" Florence asked practically. "I know the ranch is successful," but August smiled. "I've been saving since I came back from St. Louis. Could have gone back to finish my education a dozen times, but something kept me here. Now I know what I was waiting for." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I want to use what I learned, design a home that honors both the practical needs of ranch life and the beauty you've taught me to value again." "I would love that," Florence whispered, deeply moved by his gesture. "We'll break ground in the spring," he continued, clearly excited now that he'd shared his plan. "Live in the main house until it's ready. Father's already talking about which furniture pieces should go with us, including my mother's piano, which no one has played in years." "I play," Florence admitted. "Not expertly, but—" August's smile widened. "Another sign we were meant to be. Mother would have loved that. Her piano will make music again." The evening of October 31st, the night before their wedding, found Florence sitting with Gertrude in the boarding house parlor. Her trunk was packed for the move to the Valentine ranch tomorrow after the ceremony, and a strange mixture of excitement and nostalgia filled her. "I never thought I'd find this here," she confessed to her aunt. "When Father died and I had to leave Boston, I thought my life was ending. That I'd wither away in this harsh place where everything I valued seemed worthless." Gertrude reached over to squeeze her hand. "And instead, you thrived not by changing to suit Fort Worth, but by remaining steadfastly yourself until Fort Worth began to change to suit you." Florence smiled at the observation. "Not just me. August too. He was trying so hard to be only his father's son, all grit and practicality, but there was always something more in him, waiting for permission to emerge." "You gave each other that permission," Gertrude said softly. "To be your full selves. It's a rare gift in marriage." The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the garden wedding at the Valentine ranch. Florence dressed with Gertrude's help, the white gown with its delicate lace overlay making her look, in her aunt's words, like a vision of spring in autumn. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Standing beneath an arch of late-blooming roses, Florence and August exchanged vows before the minister. their words carrying clearly to the gathered guests nearly everyone from Fort Worth, plus neighboring ranchers and their families. "I promise to honor your gentle heart," August vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To protect it without changing it, to value it as the gift it is. You saved me, Florence, from becoming hard in a hard land. With you, I remember what we're building toward, what truly matters beyond mere survival." Florence's own vows acknowledged the balance they'd found together. "I promise to bring beauty to our life without forgetting practicality, to remain soft-hearted without becoming blind to reality. You showed me that gentleness can coexist with strength, that one enhances rather than diminishes the other." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, August's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together, a perfect blending of gentleness and passion. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and laughter filling the Valentine ranch house and spilling out onto the porch and grounds. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the garden, creating a magical atmosphere that many guests remarked would be remembered as the most beautiful event Fort Worth had ever seen. Near midnight, Florence and August slipped away from the remaining revelers to the small cabin. August had prepared for their wedding night not the line shack where they'd sheltered from the storm months ago, but a properly appointed guest cabin at the far end of the property, offering privacy and comfort. There, in the soft glow of lamplight, they discovered each other fully for the first time, August's strength tempered by tenderness, Florence's innocence balanced by eager love. Their union was everything both had dreamed of, a perfect culmination of the connection that had been growing between them since that first meeting on Fort Worth's dusty street. "I love you, Florence Valentine," August murmured as they lay entwined afterward, her head resting on his chest. The new name sent a thrill through her. "And I love you, August Valentine, more than I ever thought possible in this life." 5 years later, Florence stood on the porch of the house August had built for them on the ridge overlooking the Valentine ranch. Behind her, the sounds of their home filled the air, 3-year-old Victoria chasing her little brother James through the hallway, their laughter echoing off walls adorned with paintings, bookshelves filled with literature, and vases of fresh flowers from Florence's expanded garden. August had designed the house himself, blending the practical necessities of ranch life with the beauty and refinement Florence valued. Large windows captured the magnificent views. A music room housed Victoria Valentine's restored piano, which Florence played daily, and the library contained volumes from Boston alongside texts on cattle breeding and water management. As Florence watched the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson, she felt August's arms encircle her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Valentine," he murmured. She leaned back against his solid strength. "I was thinking about something Martha Wilkins said to me the day we met. Do you remember? She told me my softness would get me killed in Fort Worth." August chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. And instead, Florence turned in his arms to face him. At 32, August had only grown more handsome, a few strands of silver at his temples adding distinction to his appearance. The past 5 years had brought challenges: drought, cattle disease, even a brief resurgence of tensions with remaining native tribes, but through it all, they had held fast to their shared vision. "Instead, it helped build this," she said, gesturing to encompass not just their home but all they'd created together. The Valentine Ranch now included a small schoolhouse where local children received education 3 days a week, with promising students like Tommy Jenkins, now 15, and preparing for college in St. Louis, given special attention. The lending library had grown into a proper town institution, housed in its own small building on Main Street. Florence's practice of bringing flowers to unnamed graves had evolved into a community effort to maintain the cemetery with dignity. "You know what my father said to me last week?" August asked, his green eyes warm with amusement. What? He said he never thought he'd see the day when Fort Worth cowboys would tip their hats to a lady planting flowers, but now they'd be embarrassed to do otherwise. August brushed a kiss across her forehead. You've changed this place, Florence. Your gentleness has been like water on parched ground. We've changed it together, she corrected. Your strength made space for my softness to matter. From inside came the sound of Victoria calling for her mother, followed by James's insistence that he needed his father to see the drawing he'd created. August smiled. Duty calls, it seems. As they turned to go inside, Florence paused for one last look at the sunset. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Not finishing your education, not building bridges and buildings across the country, August's answer came without hesitation. Never. I've built what matters most: this home, this family, this community, and as for bridges. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the finger that still bore his mother's pearl ring. You were the most important one, the bridge between who I was trying to be and who I truly am. He cupped her face in his hands. Your gentleness saved me, Florence. It saves me still every day. Their kiss was interrupted by two small bodies colliding with their legs, demanding attention. Laughing, they each scooped up a child, August swinging James high in the air while Victoria nestled against her mother's shoulder. Together, they carried their children inside to the warmth and light of the home. They'd built a home that stood as living proof that gentleness could not only survive in a harsh land, but transform it, one soft-hearted act at a time.